I do not own the rights to this music. Hello, and welcome to Sunday School Summary with Brother Ron. Sunday School lesson for Sunday, May the 29th, 2022. Our reference material for the Sunday School Summary is based upon the International Sunday School Lesson Series as published by the Sunday School Publishing Board. We are discussing God Frees and Redeems as the title of the Spring Lesson Series, and the series focuses through the lens of liberation and Christian freedom to examine and experience the nature of God who acts to deliver and free people in unexpected ways and in different situations. The God Frees and Redeems lesson series is categorized into 3 units or groups of lessons. In Unit 1, we talked about liberating Passover. In Unit 2, we talked about liberating Gospels. And in Unit 3, we're talking about liberating letters. The title of our 5th lesson in the Unit 3 and final lesson in the Spring Lesson Series is titled Choosing Well. Choosing well or making good decisions. And the key verse comes from Galatians chapter 5, verse 14, which reads, "If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit." Now, the title of today's lesson, Choosing Well, from chapter 5, is a continuation of Paul's letter to the churches of Galatia to address the divisions in the church, primarily concerning the law of Moses and circumcision. Now, some Jewish converted Christians were teaching that non-Jewish converts had to practice the Jewish rite of circumcision. And Paul wrote this letter to defend the unity of faith of the gospel of Jesus Christ and to rebuke the false teaching that Gentiles must follow the law of Moses as it relates to circumcision in order to be saved and therefore justified by God. Now, Paul in this epistle teaches and emphasizes that justification comes through faith and not good works or deeds under the law of Moses, which brings us to today's lesson. In other words, we are supposed to walk our faith and not talk our faith. The summary lesson points for today, Spirit freed, and that's from Galatians chapter 5, verses 16 through 18. Spirit fruit from Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 through 23. And spirit fruit is from Galatians chapter 5, verses 24 through 26. The passages for the lesson today revolve around the key words of faith, spirit, and fruit. Now, faith is complete trust, assurance, belief, or confidence, and our faith is controlled by the Holy Spirit. In today's lesson, spirit is an attitude that reflects and directs our relationship and communication with God. The mental functions of awareness, insight, understanding, judgment, and other reasoning powers that we apply to a given situation based upon our faith. And fruit is the fruits of the Spirit grow in our lives when we walk in step with and is directed by the Holy Spirit. And we know the fruit is the produce of a plant. But in this case, the produce is the Holy Spirit. Spirit freed from Galatians chapter 5, verses 16 through 18. In these passages, Paul addressed the Christian and the internal conflict, and meaning the conflict between the spirit and the flesh. And he says it is diametrically opposed to each other. And he goes on to say it's what we enjoy and want to do versus what is right. And that is the conflict of the spirit and the flesh. And he goes on to say, this I say then, that you should walk in the spirit, and then you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. And he says, for the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary to each other, meaning they are diametrically opposed. So that you cannot do the things that you would want to do, but you have to be led by the Holy Spirit. And he says, but if ye be led of the Spirit, you are not under the law. So we are not going to be penalized under the law because we are being led by the Holy Spirit. And we're not, therefore, not subject to the law. So the believer's only hope for controlling sin is the reliance on the Holy Spirit as opposed to trying to obey the laws of Moses. The second summary point is spirit fruit, and that's from Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 through 23. And in these passages, Paul addressed the Christian character and sin, or the fruits produced by following a life of the flesh. And he says that we are wrestling against the sensual, which is sexual in nature, the religious, the temperamental, impairment of judgment from excess living, so that the sensual works of sin are manifest as adultery, fornication, uncleanliness, and lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulation, wrath, strife, seditions, and heresies are manifestations of the religious sins. Envy, murder, drunkenness, reveling, and such of the like, which I tell you before, as I have told you in the past, says Paul, that they which do those things will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. But he goes on to say that the Christian character is marked by the fruit of the Spirit. But he says, and this fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, and faith. And lastly, he sums it up and says that none of this is contrary to the law. It says meekness, temperance, against such there is no law. So there's no law for the spirit of the fruit. It comes from the Holy Spirit. So we show our love to God and our love to each other in the way that we live. And that is the Christian character and is the spirit of holy fruit. The spirit footpath from Galatians chapter 5, 24 through 26. And in these passages, Paul talks about the Christian conduct and how to use the path or trail provided by the Holy Spirit. Walking this path produces spiritual fruit or produce and is reflected in what one does and not what one says. So it's our actions and not our intentions that matter. And he goes on to say, and they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. And it says, if we live in the Spirit, let us walk in the Spirit. So let us not be desirous or vainglory, provoking one another, or envying one another. And as Paul said in last week's lesson, because that would destroy us. And we want to live for Christ and not be destroyed based on sin. So our focus and reliance should be on the guidance of the Holy Spirit and not on Siri or Google, which we are tempted to do in this modern age of technology, but we should use the Holy Spirit as our guide. Those are the summary lesson points for Sunday, May the 29th, 2022. Spirit freed from Galatians chapter 5, verses 16 through 18. Spirit fruit from Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 through 23. Spirit footpath from Galatians chapter 5, verses 24 through 26. This is Brother Ron with the Sunday School Summary for Sunday, May the 29th, 2022. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you next Sunday for another edition of Sunday School Summary with Brother Ron.